The sun blazed over the turquoise waters of the Amalfi Coast, painting the waves in shades of sapphire and emerald as they lapped gently against the rocks below. From the balcony of our hotel room, I could see fishing boats bobbing lazily in the distance, their white sails catching the light like paper lanterns drifting across the sea. For a brief moment, I thought life couldn't be more perfect. My parents, my two older siblings, and I had spent days wandering through the maze of ancient streets, brushing past walls covered in blooming bougainvillea, tasting fresh pasta in tiny family-owned trattorias, and indulging in creamy gelato that melted too quickly in the heat. We had taken countless family photos, my mother insisting on capturing every view, every meal, every smile. But what those pictures never showed was the quiet storm that always brewed between us, the tension that clung to every conversation, the way they looked at me like I was an extra piece of luggage they hadn't planned to bring. It had always been that way. I was the youngest, the unplanned one, the one who didn't fit neatly into their polished family dynamic. My siblings were golden, successful, charming, effortlessly adored by my parents. I, on the other hand, had always been the afterthought, the one they barely noticed unless I was somehow inconveniencing them. This trip had been no different at first. They laughed together at dinner tables, made inside jokes I didn't understand, and sometimes walked ahead without realizing I wasn't keeping up. Still, I told myself that this was a chance for things to change. I wanted to believe that maybe, in a place this beautiful, surrounded by the warm glow of Italy, we could be the family I had always imagined. But that night, my fragile hope began to crack. I had returned to my room early, exhausted from the day's adventures, and lay on the bed listening to the muffled hum of the sea outside through the thin walls. I could hear faint voices from the room next door, my parents' voices, along with the low chuckle of my brother. My name floated through the conversation, followed by my sister's laughter. I sat up, straining to listen. The words were muted, but I caught them, sharp and clear enough to slice through me. She'll be fine on her own. The room went quiet for a moment after that, then more laughter, as if whatever they had just discussed was some sort of private joke. My chest tightened, an icy pressure spreading through me. I tried to convince myself I had misheard, that they were talking about something else entirely. I told myself not to overthink it, not to let paranoia ruin the last days of the trip. I slept fitfully, waking several times during the night, each time telling myself I was being ridiculous. When morning came, I expected to hear the familiar sound of their voices in the hallway, the clink of coffee cups, the shuffle of bags being packed. But when I opened my eyes, The air was still. Too still. I listened. No laughter, no footsteps, not even the sound of a closing door. My heart began to pound as I swung my legs over the side of the bed. Something felt wrong. I grabbed my cardigan and stepped into the hallway. The space outside was empty. The suitcases that had been lined up neatly the night before were gone. A sick feeling spread through my stomach as I hurried back into my room. My nightstand was bare. The passport I had placed there for convenience was missing. My phone, my wallet, all gone. I tore through my bag, my suitcase, the sheets, even the pockets of the clothes I had worn the day before. But it was useless. Everything I needed to travel, to contact anyone, to survive in a foreign country, had vanished. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my pulse thundering in my ears. The realization hit me slowly, like ice water trickling down my spine. They hadn't just left early for a tour or run down to the cafe. They had left me deliberately, and they had taken everything that could help me follow them. Asterisk, asterisk at first. I truly believed it was some twisted joke. My family had a history of petty cruelties, small digs, calculated exclusions, but never anything like this. Maybe they had gone sightseeing early and forgotten to wake me. Maybe they had left for breakfast without telling me. Clinging to that hope, I grabbed the cardigan draped over the chair and headed downstairs. My pulse pounding so hard it felt like it might burst through my skin. The lobby was warm with the scent of freshly baked pastries, sunlight spilling across the marble floor, but it felt cold to me. The receptionist, a man with silver hair and tired eyes, looked up as I approached. Before I could say anything, he reached under the counter and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "For you," he said in accented English. I unfolded it with trembling hands, my breath catching before I'd even read the first line. It was my mother's handwriting, neat and deliberate, the loops in her letters as precise as always. "We think it's best if you stay here for a while and figure out your life. Don't follow us." I stared at the words, my mind struggling to process them. They weren't just gone, they had decided I wasn't worth bringing back. My throat burned, and I could feel every beat of my heart, loud and frantic. The receptionist, avoiding my eyes, added that my room was no longer paid for. "Checkout is at 11, he said flatly. I felt the ground shift beneath me. My phone was gone. My passport was gone. My wallet gone. I had no way to prove who I was. No money for a train, bus, or even a single meal. Panic clawed at me, and I turned to leave, half expecting to see them walk through the front door, grinning as if they'd played some elaborate prank. But the entrance remained still, the sunlight outside blinding, and empty an hour later. I was standing on a narrow cobblestone street with nothing but a small backpack that held a sweater, a notebook, and a half-empty bottle of water. People bustled past me, their voices a blur of Italian phrases I couldn't understand. My chest felt heavy, and the noise around me seemed to grow louder, pressing in on all sides. The betrayal was so sharp it felt physical, like someone had reached inside me and ripped out the part that still believed I mattered to them. For the first time in my life, I was truly alone, not the quiet kind of alone you feel in your bedroom at night, but the crushing, endless kind that swallows you whole and leaves nothing but silence in its wake. Days blurred together after that. The sun would rise, and I would wander, trying to figure out where I might find food or shelter. I learned which trash bins cafes used for their unsold pastries at closing time. I found benches that were shaded during the day and hidden enough at night that no one bothered me. Hunger gnawed at me constantly, a dull ache that made my thoughts sluggish and my limbs heavy. I tried to speak to locals, hoping someone might help, but the language barrier made most of them shake their heads or walk away. Every rejection made the anger in me grow anger at them, at myself, at the world, for letting this happen. That anger became my fuel, keeping me moving even when my body screamed for rest. One evening, the wind off the coast cut through my thin sweater, and I curled up outside the window of a small bookstore, my knees pulled to my chest. Through the glass, I watched a woman rearranging stacks of books. She was middle-aged, with warm brown skin and dark hair streaked with silver, her movements slow and deliberate. At one point, she glanced outside and saw me. Our eyes met for only a moment, but something passed between us, curiosity, maybe pity. She disappeared into the back, and I assumed she'd decided to ignore me like everyone else. But a few minutes later, she emerged, unlocking the front door and stepping into the cool night air. "You look frozen," she said gently, her Italian accented, but clear enough for me to understand. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. She motioned for me to follow her inside, and the warmth of the shop hit me like a wave. The scent of old paper and fresh coffee wrapped around me, almost making me dizzy. She brought me to a small table in the corner, set down a steaming bowl of soup, and pushed it toward me. I hadn't realized how hungry I was until the first spoonful burned my tongue. Her name was Alicia. She didn't ask many questions that night, only offered me a place to sleep in the storeroom behind the shop. The room was small and dusty, with a single cot and a thin blanket, but it felt like a palace compared to the streets. In the mornings, she let me help around the store stacking books, sweeping floors, organizing shelves. Payment wasn't much, just enough for bread, fruit, and the occasional coffee. But it was more than I'd had in weeks. As the days passed, Alicia taught me bits of Italian, shared meals with me, and listened when I spoke. For the first time, I felt like someone truly saw me not as a burden, not as an afterthought, but as a person worth caring about. And with every day that passed, the raw wound of betrayal began to transform. The bitterness inside me didn't fade, it sharpened, hardening into something more dangerous. I stopped thinking about survival as my only goal. I began thinking about what I would do when I went back. I wasn't just going to confront them. I was going to make sure they could never hurt me again. Months later, I was no longer the fragile, naive shadow of a person they had left behind on those sunlit streets of Italy. The girl who once stood barefoot on cobblestones, trembling with hunger and fear, was gone. In her place stood someone, sharper, colder, and infinitely stronger. Alicia had been more than just my savior. She had been my teacher, my mentor, my compass. She showed me how to navigate bureaucracy, how to dig through public records, how to see the fine print that most people ignored. I worked tirelessly in her shop, saved every cent I could, and when I wasn't shelving books, I was studying Italian, business law, property rights, anything that might one day be useful. Through the embassy, I managed to secure a new passport and identification. It took months of paperwork and patience, but I was no longer in a rush. The more time passed, the more I learned about the people I used to call family. Quiet evenings in Alicia's back office turned into deep dives into public databases, tax records, and financial disclosures. What I uncovered made my blood boil and my lips curl in bitter amusement. They were drowning in debt, credit cards maxed out, loans unpaid, and the house they flaunted so proudly wasn't even fully theirs. And then I stumbled across a set of dusty, forgotten legal documents from years ago, documents my father had once hastily signed without understanding their implications. They listed me, of all people, as a partial co-owner of the house. I realized then that I didn't need to scream at them or throw my pain in their faces. I could do something far better. When I finally booked my ticket home, I told no one. My return was not going to be announced. No teary airport reunions or awkward doorstep conversations. I wanted my arrival to be a shockwave, and it was. The moment I stepped into the driveway, dragging my single suitcase behind me, their faces went pale. My mother's lips parted in disbelief. My brother froze mid-step, and my sister's hand tightened around the car keys she was holding. They didn't rush to hug me. They didn't even speak at first. Just silence, heavy and suffocating. I said nothing about Italy, Nothing about the nights I'd slept on stone benches or the days I'd gone without food. Instead, I smiled politely, like a stranger greeting neighbors. I asked to come inside, and when I did, I took in every corner of the house not with nostalgia, but with calculation. I let them speak, let them stumble through awkward explanations and half-hearted apologies, all while I carried the weight of the truth in my pocket. The second shock came days later, when legal notices began arriving. They discovered, to their horror, that the girl they had left behind now had the power to take the very roof over their heads. The weeks that followed were a flurry of meetings with lawyers, filing paperwork, and making phone calls. Every skill Alicia had taught me was put to use. I wasn't cruel for the sake of cruelty. I was precise, efficient, and absolutely unshakable. Piece by piece, I dismantled the false security they had built their lives upon, until the house that had once been their pride was legally mine. 2 weeks later, the eviction notice was taped to their front door. It was not a surprise to me, but for them, it was devastation. My phone lit up with call after call. My mother's number, my sister's, my father's. The first few I ignored. Then the voicemails started, screaming, begging, threatening. My father's voice cracked as he demanded I be reasonable, as though reason had anything to do with what they had done to me. My sister cried into the phone about having nowhere to go, as if I had somewhere to go when they left me thousands of miles from home. On the morning of their departure, I stood across the street, leaning casually against a lamppost, watching. The moving truck's back door yawned open, swallowing their furniture, their clothes, the fragments of the life they had stolen from me. My brother slammed boxes into the truck with more force than necessary. My sister kept glancing in my direction, her face pale and tight. And then my mother looked at me, just for a second. Her eyes held something I had never seen before. Fear, yes, but also the dawning realization that I was no longer the powerless child they had cast aside. I was the one holding the final card. When the truck finally pulled away, taking them with it, I crossed the street slowly, savoring every step. The house loomed before me, familiar yet entirely new in my eyes. I slid the key into the lock, feeling the click of the tumblers, and pushed the door open. The air inside was still, almost reverent, as if the walls themselves understood the shift in ownership. This was my home now, not theirs, and I promised myself, standing in that quiet hallway, that no one would ever take it from me again.